Okay, this is lecture of GIS and NeoGeography. I'm Richard Treeps. NeoGeography is also known as NeoGeo or the GeoWeb. Okay, so introduction. What we're going to be talking about, first of all, data in context there on the top row. Basically what I'm saying there is that sometimes GIS analysis is very powerful, but sometimes just putting data on a map is very good, so we'll talk about that. On the second row down, on the far right, you'll see we've got what I call old GIS. That's sort of the GIS we've been talking about so far. But there's new forms coming out. There's NeoGIS and NeoGeography. And I'll be explaining how those are different and what they mean. And then on the bottom row, we'll be talking about NeoGeography and its applications. That's mashups, VGI, which is Volunteer Geographic Information, and Tours, which is Google Earth Tours. Throughout the talk, sometimes I'm going to be telling you to stop and go and watch a clip. There's other clips that you can follow links to. If you want to see these, you'll have to pick up the other file, which is a PowerPoint file, which has these links as live, but it would be a good idea if you want to go and you're interested to go look at these. The top of these links is how we got here, which is a sort of history of GIS and mapping, and takes you up to the time that I start in the timeline here. The bottom one is Tim Berners-Lee, he who invented the web, if you didn't know, and he's discussing in this video open data, and he's trying to urge people to release data for free. What's interesting about that, if you look at it, all his examples are maps, which tells you just how powerful maps can be. Okay, so first row, data in context. This is Condoleezza Rice. Michael Jones, the Google Earth Chief Technology Officer, went to see her, and he showed her Google Earth, and he showed a Darfur project. And her comment was, wow, we can really do things with this. Now, you know by now that Google Earth isn't that powerful as a GIS, so what was she on about? Michael Jones's take really was that Condoleezza Rice, despite being at the top of the most powerful intelligence agency the world has ever seen in the American government, she was just getting reports and spreadsheets. That was how her information was coming in, and it wasn't in context. So the data wasn't in context, but the simple application of putting information about the genocide in Darfur actually on a map really showed us something, which is what she was excited about. So that tells you the real power of just data on a map and data in context. So going down to the next row, we're talking about old geography, GIS. And if you wanted to do computer mapping prior to 2005, that was it. GIS was it. And it's expensive. The software was expensive. It required experts to run. You are learning some of those skills of the experts to run, set up. It's very limited in web integration, and there's no background data. So the image at the top right there, you can see it's a buffer zone around a road, and you can see the roads, and then behind the roads it's just white. There's just blank information. Google Maps, Google Earth, you get information there, put there. So that's what GIS was prior to 2005. And if you wanted to do analysis or if you wanted to do visualization, that was your only option. And I kind of, last year when I gave this lecture, I kind of over egged the pudding, I think, because I really didn't mention that it's still very powerful. ARC is extremely powerful. And the analysis and visualization it can do is very powerful still, and it continues to be able to do that. So next along came NeoGeography. This is about 2005, and there was an explosion in use of web maps. So there's Google Earth, Virtual Globe, and Google My Maps, which is 2D. The image down there at the bottom right is something I did in Google Earth, and I made a model that flooded London up to a height of 150 meters. And that's the area in the east of London, the Bankers area. So I flooded the Bankers there. I'm quite pleased with myself for doing that. And these tools are internet based, and you can see in the image down there, there's background imagery behind the buildings. They're free and very easy to use. but they're bad on analysis. So they have all these advantages, but bad on analysis. So if you want to combine two sets of data in two maps, this is not the way to do it. They are great at visualization, and that image down there is a perfect example of that. So moving on to NeoGIS. So NeoGeography is a term that's banging around on the web. NeoGIS, I've just made it up to try and explain another classification. And really, the best example, only it's not the only example, is Google Fusion Tables that came out in 2008. Again, it's internet based, it's free, it's moderately easy to use, it's a bit more complex, and it's based on Google's own expertise in handling big data. So they got these tables and they thought, well, we can give them to people and people can then do GIS with them. And really it's about cloud GIS. So this term, the cloud, you may have heard of that coming around. Really it refers to data, and the power of your computer is not sitting in front of you on your computer anymore, but it's sitting somewhere on a server that you connect up to on the internet, and you tell through the internet the server to do analysis on things. So that's cloud GIS. And really it's very good at visualization, just like Google Earth, Google Maps is, but it also starts doing simple analysis. You can start doing simple analysis. And the video I've taken that I want you to watch down below of the St. Helens trees is an example of this, and it talks you through just the kind of things that you can do with Fusion Tables and how it does simple analysis. Again, there's some more links. Guardian newspaper has been doing quite a lot in terms of not only releasing stories, but releasing the data behind the stories, particularly about WikiLeaks that you probably have heard of. And the talk that I linked to there, this is a map down the bottom right from Iraq, and it shows people killed by roadside bombs. And Simon Rogers, the guy giving this talk, talks about this and talks about the fact that anytime he wants to do some mapping or do some clever visualization, he has to grab a GIS person or a web programmer. And with the power of Fusion Tables, he can do simple maps himself. And this is an example there. And he talks about that. It's quite interesting if you want to check that out. So what have we done so far? Well, we've talked about data in context, and we've talked about the separation of old GIS and the web forms of GIS. Now we're going on to talk about these applications at the bottom: mashups, VGI, volunteer geographic information, and tours. But what I'd like you to do is pause the video for a moment and have a think about which of those, rank those three: NeoGIS, NeoGeography, and old GIS in terms of visualization power. So I'm just going to pause for a second. And the answer is that old GIS is still the most powerful in terms of visualization. ARC is incredibly powerful. NeoGeography is only really good for visualization, very simple analysis tools in there. NeoGIS is starting to develop its own sort of simple visualization tool. So there's your ranking. Okay, first application of web mapping, really, these NeoGeography tools. Take a geographic data set, and it's almost always points. Plot it on Google Maps or another map. It doesn't have to be Google Maps. And to make some money, you can add adverts down the side. And the people doing this are web programmers rather than GIS trained people. And there's thousands of these. The last time anyone counted it and told me a figure, it was 150,000. I think it's way, way bigger than that by now. And that image at the bottom is of chicagocrime.org. And that's a Google Map mashup that was the first example. And it shows crimes in Chicago, and you can filter it with the controls on the right there for different kinds of things. But it's just an example of very simple GIS, if at all. If it's not just data in context, it's just showing you a map with some data on it. And people can make money from this by adding web adverts on the side. So it's a big explosion of use in mashups. Next one we're going to talk about is volunteer geographic information. So people, just as Wikipedia has been people writing encyclopedia entries on their own and just adding them out there, people can do the same with maps. And in 2010, the Haiti earthquake occurred. And when that happened, all the map data that went with Haiti disappeared in the earthquake. It was under one of the buildings that collapsed. And unfortunately, even more unfortunately, a lot of the UN personnel who had contacts and knew about the mapping and that sort of thing, they were also killed in that initial earthquake. But what happened, so there was no mapping information left and the backups were slow coming out, is that very quickly after the disaster, satellites like the GOI satellite, which Google own, took imagery, and remote sensing data appeared within 24 hours of the earthquake. So you could see what had collapsed and you could see where people were gathering and those sorts of things. And the video I want you to go and watch now is of OpenStreetMap, and it shows the edits within Haiti after the earthquake. So what happened is that people piled in, and using OpenStreetMap, which is like a map wiki, they annotated the remote sensing data and they reproduced street maps, and that data was useful to people in Haiti who were trying to drag people out from underneath buildings and trying to get round and fix the situation there. So that's a wonderful, lovely story. It has huge potential in the future for people to help out in these sort of situations. And it's an example of the first time you don't have to just give some money when you hear about an earthquake. You can actually sit at home on the end of a computer and help. Unfortunately, it has many problems, and you won't find these discussed out there on the web. You can look up some video clips discussing this, but there's a number of problems, and this is a research student did some work with me for his MSc last year, and there's a problem with GIS training within the organizations. So people like Oxfam and other NGOs reacting don't really know about GIS. So even though they get the map data, they can't do very much sophisticated work with it. When all this map wiki data was out there, unfortunately, there was multiple websites offering multiple different sets of mapping. So that caused great confusion. There was all different formats of the data. No one had chosen a standard format to move the information around. And there was just a general lack of communication between the non-government agencies, the NGOs, non-government organizations, and these new organizations who were like Ushahidi, who were trying to help. And no one really knew how to talk to each other because they didn't know what each other did. So what I'd like you to consider now is think about reasons why mashups and VGI are better done by Neo Geo rather than GIS. So scribble down 4 or 5 answers if you can. Pause the video and think about it a bit, and then I'll just tell you the answers. Okay, so here we go. It's ease of use. Mashups especially and VGI, you need them to be very easy to use for the public, and GIS is quite complex. They're web-based. That's very good and very easy to access for people. They don't have to install any software just to pile in and help. Free to use. That's an important one. It's free remote sensing data. No one has to pay to see the satellite data anymore. For mashups, ad-based revenue is possible down the side. And analysis is not required. So neither in mashups or thinking about volunteer geographic information, you don't have to analyze the data. You just have to put it in VGI and you just have to absorb it in mashups. So the analytic power of GIS isn't really necessary. Okay, so we've done everything except the bottom right, which is about Google Earth tours now. So what is a tour? Well, a tour is it's like the BBC weather forecast. You get flown round and data layers are turned on and off. And I'd like you to pause the video again and go and watch the oil spill video now, and then come back. Okay, so what you saw from that is a video of me talking and talking you through a Google Earth tour. And it's a very powerful thing. Obviously, you can see how it visualizes things. But we should remember a golden rule of using multimedia like this, which is just because we can does not mean we should. And here's another lovely pictorial example of that. And we've always got to be thinking of the user. We've got to be thinking, how can we explain this? What does the user need? That kind of issue. So you can see that in the video, I added annotations like the screenshot you can see in the top right. At one point, I ringed the oil slick in red and the bottom right of southeast Britain to compare sizes, and that was because that's quite a complicated image and I needed to draw your eyes to the right bit of the screen at that time. So annotations really help the user. Another example is scale. So in that one you can see the black blob that's the UK, and I put that in just to make the point about how big the oil slick is. If that wasn't there, you would have difficulty understanding the true size of it. And flights, you'll have noticed within the video that I flew you in a number of stages. So every time you flew in or out in quite a sedate, straightforward manner. It's actually possible to swing the camera around and fly around in a crazy way in Google Earth, but I didn't do that because it's actually disorientating. If you want to, you can follow that link and go and see a video that gives better evidence of that. But that's another way of thinking of the user, is to do simple flights. So a quick question I'd like you to think about is, which of the above is a cartographic issue? So have a think about that, jot something down on a piece of paper, it's a good idea, and pause the video while you think. Okay, and the answer is that the only one that isn't truly a cartographic issue is flights. The scale is a well-known cartographic issue. On every OS map you'll have a scale along the bottom. And annotations is in a complicated map. You may use annotations like a "you are here" when you go to the park and you want to see where you are on a map. So scale is probably on many more maps than annotations, but they're both cartographic really. There's the aeroplane again for no apparent reason. So I wanted to tell you about a new course I've got coming out next semester. You should have received an email about this. It's from the CIP, which is the Curriculum Innovation Project. Excuse me. It's called Communicating with Web Maps. And it's really going back to this idea about thinking about the user. So we've done lots of stuff about GIS in this course, and it's all very good and powerful analysis, but to really concentrate on how do you present things to the user. And to make the point of why this is important, I've got a couple of images here. And this is really dreadful PowerPoint slide. And a quick scan, if you give it a second, you probably can't make out what it's about at all, which is part of the problem. What it actually is the Columbia Space Shuttle disaster. What happened was a piece of foam fell off one bit of the space shuttle and hit the heat-absorbing tiles on launch. And they knew this, they'd seen this on the videos. And when it was in orbit, they were trying to decide what to do about it and how they should fix it and how seriously they should take it. And the engineers actually presented to the senior NASA people. You can see it's Boeing down the bottom left of the slide there, if you can read that. They presented to them and were trying to tell them that really it was a pretty dangerous situation, but they didn't explain themselves well at all. And the key bit of that whole slide is actually the bottom line, and it's been arrowed and squared by someone else. That emphasis wasn't there in the original. And what it's saying is the volume of ramp, that's the foam, is 1900 cubic inches versus 3 cubic inches for a test. So all the rest of that slide is saying, well, we fired bits of foam at the tiles and tested what happened to them, and it may cause damage, but the bits we used in the experiment were 3 cubic inches, and that's tiny compared to the massive lump that hit the space shuttle. So that was the point really they needed to make, and you can see that they totally failed to do that. So very bad communication and of information, and it wasn't the cause of the Columbia Space Shuttle accident, but it was one of the chain of bad things that happened that led to it. So really it shows you how important it is to get things right. As a contrast, this is an absolutely wonderful graphic. And the thing I really like about this is it just packs so much in an understandable way, and it doesn't need any animation at all. It's no clever Google Earth tour. It's just completely static. What it is it's Napoleon's 1812 Russian campaign when he went to try and attack the Russians in Moscow. And you can see he sets out with 472,000 troops at the far left, and the pink is his advance out, and the black is his retreat back. And you can see just how devastated his troops were, how they were losing people and people were dying all over the place. And it shows so many things because it shows the lat and long points of his route. It also shows you the number of troops that he had at any point. It shows you the temperature in Celsius on the return, which is a really key part. That's why so many of them died. And it also shows some troops leaving on the left there and how they came back and joined the retreating troops without ever getting to Moscow. So all kinds of detail in there in a wonderfully clear graphic with scale on there, and it's got everything, and it's very good communication, graphical communication. This is exactly what the kind of skills and the kind of things and how to put these things together is what I'll be talking about in the course. So it's second semester, it's an option. You should have had an email about it, and there's a little promotional video with me getting overexcited and saying how much I think it's going to be great in that link if you want to follow that. Okay, so conclusion. So we talked about all these things. Data in context. We talked about how Condoleezza Rice was really impressed with Google Earth and how that shows really just the power of putting data on a map. We talked about NeoGIS. So this is simple not simple visualization, simple analysis and visualization in the top left. And NeoGeography, there was a mashup there in the right. We talked about old GIS and some of the characteristics of it. Now moving along the bottom column there, talked about mashups as being an example of NeoGeography. Volunteer geographic information, we talked about OpenStreetMap in Haiti. And finally, we talked about Google Earth tours there. and in the practical that follows, you'll be doing how to create a map in Google Earth and creating a Google Earth tour of the Haiti earthquake.